There has been mounting calls for African countries to allow visa-free travel within the continent to drive tourism and encourage global trade. While many countries have heeded the call to relax visa rules, some remain skeptical. Joining us now to talk about how open borders can benefit the continent is Professor Chris Isike from the University of Pretoria. Professor, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. We heard Kenyan President William Ruto saying that when people cannot travel, business people cannot travel, entrepreneurs cannot travel, we all become net losers. A few days after that, President Paul Kagame of Rwanda followed suit, saying all Africans will now be able to enter Rwanda without visas. How significant are these moves, especially considering the African Union's agenda?
Good morning, Mpho, and thank you for having me. Yes, it's important. It's a significant move towards integrating the continent in serious terms and in promoting the Africa we want mantra that we've been mouthing for many years now. It's not sensible that we open our borders to countries from all over the world, but close it to ourselves in the continent, especially when you consider the colonial or artificial nature of these borders that we actually imposed on the continent before. But apart from these sentimental reasons, there are good economic reasons why it is important to keep borders open, one of which would be the fact that it can boost economic growth for especially those countries that have tourism prospects. It can also lead to increased trade and investment as well as job creation. So this is a significant move for the continent in terms of becoming closer, making integration happen, and making sense of a United States of Africa.
So you speak about important, significant progress, but while the continent has made progress on the aspects of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that deal with trade and investment, there really hasn't been much progress on the free movement of people, has there?
Yes. And that's why there's not. You're correct, and that's why it is important, to have these visa regimes taken off or more liberalized. The idea of open visas have been in the continent. Different African countries have, free visa regimes to other African countries. Over 31 countries have been operating for many years now. The idea of, visa on arrival, and it makes it really easy for people to want to go to those countries, because you can just apply for a visa and the incidence of being refused is quite low. So those kinds of border openness have been existing in many ways, but it is only now we are beginning to see concrete move towards actually making it visa free. In other words, not just appearing at the airport to apply for a visa or any port of entry, but also not having to pay for such a visa. It helps to make sense of the idea of the African Continental Free Trade Area deal, which is going to boost economic growth within the continent. There's no way we can talk about the after without talking about making it easier, visa free, and making it easier for Africans to actually cross borders within the continent and actually engage in trade.
Mm-hmm. Now, while many countries have heeded this call to relax visas, some do remain skeptical. What could be some of the reasons for the discomfort, do you think?
Well, it's the usual perceived fear around, what migrants bring in. In many countries, migration has been, discussed as something that is negative. But of course, like everything in the world, it has both its positive and negative sides. But many countries fear this rhetoric of migrants coming in with problems, coming in with, as economic migrants especially, causing a strain on the social and economic infrastructure of the host country. Some talk about disease and crime and all these things that come with, migrants, and then the cultural shock that also goes with it. These are normal, but these migrations also take place internally within. And if we consider the fact that, many of these migrants, benefit the country in many ways, not just the economic. It will go down to countries being able, for example, if you talk about crime, the ability of a country to manage migration in such a way that migrants do not come into a host country and get a free pass to commit crime. It's about law enforcement in those countries. For instance, many people think twice before going to a lot of Asian countries if you want to deal in drugs, right? You think twice because you know that, for instance, the United Arab Emirates, they're very tough law enforcement. So people think twice about that. They are not the police. They're not corrupt. Do not get bribed by drug cartels and all these things. So if you have a problem of migrants committing crime, which is not an abnormal, it goes down to government, it goes down to law enforcement in terms of how these things are managed. The minute the message is clear that those things will not be tolerated and there's seriousness about enforcing the law, migrants will think twice about committing crime. So there are challenges, but they can be dealt with if we consider the big picture of the benefits that migration brings.
Yeah. Within the broader East African community, Uganda, Rwanda, and Kenya, they allow cross-border travel without passports. Botswana and Namibia also recently signing a similar agreement. Yet despite this progress, insofar as the stats are concerned, by the end of 2022, only 27% of African routes allowed Africans to travel visa-free. What privileges or perhaps rights does this give visitors from the continent?
Well, yeah. So, like I said, the open border management and visa-free regimes have been operating in the continent for a long time. In West Africa, for example, it's gone down to almost 20 years. Since West Africa has been allowing citizens within that region to move freely. Within the continent, within the region, right, the sub-region, and we've seen some of that as well in SADC, like you mentioned, and East Africa. So it comes down to the seriousness of government to actually make those things work. Like you mentioned, the percentage of actual movement is low because even though there's supposed to be free movement, they still put hurdles on the path of visitors coming in. And the question, it goes back to the question you raised earlier around how can you expect to have free trade, movement of goods and services and monies without free movement of people, because people are behind these movements. So we need to think about these things seriously, and if we decide that we want to do it, we get it done. We are the richest continent in the world. It is curious that we have given complete and free access to lots of countries in Europe. South Africa is one of those where it's easier for Europeans to come here than for Africans to come here. And it's part of the colonial mentality, the mental colonization we need to purge ourselves of in terms of how we see and treat each other.
Yeah, absolutely. With that in mind, how do we then track the potential contributions of migration to economic development in the countries of origin and the destination?
Well, I've always maintained that when people move from their countries, many of them do not leave their countries of origin. I'll call them home countries. They do not leave their home countries totally. We talk about the dark side of migration, which can be brain drain. But when you look at how brain sharing and brain circulation is occurring within citizens that move from their home countries to host countries, if you look at how many of these citizens give back to their original countries, their home countries, you'll find out that it then becomes from brain drain. We can talk about brain sharing, brain circulation, and it goes back to brain gain for countries of origin as well as for countries of the host countries, because many of these migrants become even when they're economic migrants, they work, they make a contribution, they pay taxes. They also offer, community development services to their host countries that contribute to the overall development of their host countries, right? But because of the networks and ties, that tie them back to their countries of origin, they still contribute through remittances and, trying to give back to their different communities, depending on their economic background. So it's a win-win situation, so long as government can keep tabs on it, government can manage it in a very efficient way. There are logistic challenges too that can come from this. Governments just need to be prepared, find ways to track visitors and find ways to ensure that when people break the law enforcement kicks in without fear or favor.
Yeah, absolutely. While there is some considerable progress on African migration, governance reforms, what will it take to now catch up and, as a result, deal fairly and rationally with the reality of migration patterns in Africa?
Well, in the light of the visa-free travel we're talking about, one challenge is for governments to improve security and border management, right? And this will also include the use of technology, so this relates to the second challenge of ensuring that all of these countries have the necessary infrastructure in place to support increased tourism and business travel that is going to emerge from this. The fact of the matter is that if we trade with one another in this continent, we will be able to develop the continent, starting from probably the most developed ones like South Africa, where the infrastructure is top-notch. Of course, they will take a stream, but over time, as I talked about brain circulation, brain sharing, you'll find that some of these benefits then get passed back to countries of origin. Big countries like South Africa would also do well to ensure that they promote good governance outside their borders, because there are implications, migration implications, transportation of crisis implications from countries that are not doing well around them, ignoring them, like the kind of quiet diplomacy we saw South Africa doing during Mbeki's time to Zimbabwe, and what that means for South Africa in the long term in terms of a hold of economic migrants moving away from a troubled Zimbabwe into South Africa, and what that can mean for a South Africa that is not able to absorb the economic and social implications of this movement. So it's a holistic project that will require all countries to come together, agree on basics at the African Union level, and then for government to come back and put things in place and actually give meaning to the words and agreements that have been agreed on at the supranational level of the African Union.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for weighing in on this discussion, speaking to us there about the benefits and looking at what countries have done, Kenya and Rwanda and the likes, to ensure visa-free travel across the continent in Africa. Still to come, of course, rounding that discussion is Professor Chris Isike from the University of Pretoria.